السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد. Firstly, apologies for the slight delay in starting. We had a few technical issues that we were dealing with. But inshallah ta'ala, today's lesson we're inshallah going to conclude the tafsir of Surah Al-Asr. And this is a surah that we began a few weeks ago. Even though it's a very relatively short and small surah, it's a surah, as we can see, that is full of many lessons and many principles. And that's why you have the famous statement of Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala, which has been rated to us in different wordings. One of them is لَوْ تَدَبَّرُ النَّاسِ هَذِهِ السُّورَةَ لَوَسِعَتْهُمْ. If people were just to contemplate and reflect on this single surah, it would be sufficient for them. In another narration or another wording that's reported from him rahimahullah, he said that if Allah was to only have revealed this surah from the Quran, it would have been sufficient. And that's because of how comprehensive it is in terms of dealing with the heart of the matter. And that is that Allah Azza wa Jal takes an oath, as we said, by time. And not just the concept of time or the abstract concept of time, but time in terms of how we use that time. Whether we use it for good or whether we use it for evil, whether we use that time beneficially or whether we waste that time. And we mentioned a number of hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that speak about the same issue. And it's something which Allah Azza wa Jal repeats as a concept and a theme throughout the Quran, when He takes oaths by not just Al-Asr, which is time in general, but by specific parts of the day and the night and specific times to show the importance of that general concept. So Allah Azza wa Jal stresses in many times in the Quran, Surah Fajr, Al-Layl, Al-Shams, Al-Qamar, Al-Duha. All of these are different types of day and night, or the sun and the moon, which denote the coming of the day and the night. And so Allah Azza wa Jal takes an oath by all of them. And in this surah, Allah Azza wa Jal makes it even more general. And we said, even though some of the scholars of tafsir specified Al-Asr to be reflecting just the time of the prayer or the evening time in which Asr occurs, the time of Asr occurs, the general opinion or the majority opinion, and the one that the likes of Al-Imam Al-Tabari and Ibn Kathir rahimahumullah and others chose, was that Al-Asr is far more general. It is far more comprehensive. It refers to time in its general sense. And then Allah Azza wa Jalla in the second verse, He says, indeed mankind is in loss. Innal insana, meaning all of man. And even though there were some scholars again of tafsir that specified that just to be the disbelievers, Allah is referring to the disbelievers, or some of them specified it even more and gave names like Abu Lahab or Abu Jahl. We said that the strongest opinion and the majority opinion amongst the scholars of tafsir is that it is a general statement. Encompasses everyone, Muslim, non-Muslim, righteous, unrighteous. It encompasses everyone. Everyone is in a state of loss. And we mentioned, I think either it was last week or the week before, how some of the scholars said that Allah Azza wa Jal, to show the importance of this issue, emphasizes that state of loss in three ways. The first is by taking an oath at the beginning of the surah, wal asr, by time, and then by using the word inna, which means indeed or verily in the Arabic language, is to emphasize the importance of something or of what's to come in that sentence. And the third way is with the lam at-tawqid, in lafi khusr. The lam here is also for emphasis and to stress importance. So Allah Azza wa Jalla says, by time, indeed mankind is surely in a state of loss. And that's a comprehensive statement. Everyone is in a state of loss. Except for, and then Allah Azza wa Jalla gives the exception, and this is where I think we paused last week, where we were discussing the concept of illa in the Quran. And illa is the word that takes a rule and it brings an exception to that rule. And we mentioned that in the Arabic language, illa has a number of benefits, or has a number of uses. Does something to the statement. Number one, it affirms the general rule that comes before it. So there's a general rule that Allah Azza wa Jalla has placed in the Quran. Mankind is in a state of loss. It confirms that is the status quo. Number two, it gives you an exception to that rule, and that's what illa does. The illa al-istithna'iyya. The istithna is to make an exception. There are exceptions to that rule. And number three, it is to, in some way, to specify or to make special those group of people. And special not in the sense that they're always in a good sense. As we mentioned, sometimes the illa or the special is in a bad sense. It's an evil sense. It's a sense that these people have been singled out, but not for good praise or for good reasons, but rather the opposite, right? And we gave examples of all of that last week. So Allah Azza wa Jal makes the exception, illa, right? So now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then goes on to mention the different aspects, or the 4 different steps for salvation, the 4 components that we need for total salvation. And just as we said with the word khusr and khusran in the Arabic language, and how Shaykh al-Sa'di rahimahullah in his tafsir, he mentioned that losses of different levels. So even though Allah Azza wa Jalla says mankind is in a state of total loss, that loss is of different levels. Someone who has iman but doesn't do good deeds, doesn't do the advising with the truth and patience, is still in a state of loss, but it's not complete and total loss, because they have the asl of iman, right? They have the basis, the foundation of believing in Allah Azza wa Jal, but maybe they never prayed, maybe they never gave zakah, maybe they don't fast in the month of Ramadan, maybe they're not good to their parents or helpful to others, or whatever it may be. So those people have some salvation, but they also have some loss. And then you have people who do good, they believe and they do good, but they don't really enjoy the good, they don't forbid the evil. It's very much about themselves, they don't really help others. It's not really about the community that they're in, their brothers, their sisters, their families, their relatives, their friends. They don't really look outside and beyond their own personal sphere. So those people still have some form of loss. In other words, that's what Shaykh al-Sa'di rahimahullah ta'ala said. So likewise, Allah Azza wa Jal now is telling us the opposite. These are steps to salvation. In order to have total salvation, you have 4 things. If you don't take all 4, you take 3, you take 2, you take 1, there is still some salvation. But it doesn't mean that it will be a total salvation. Meaning what? We know from the Sunnah that the Prophet told us sallallahu alaihi wasallam that there will be some people who are from the people of Iman, the people of this religion, people of faith, people who believe in Allah, believe in the Prophet ﷺ, who will enter into the fire because of sins that they've committed, or because of obligations that they didn't fulfill. And Allah Azza wa Jal may choose to forgive those people, shower His mercy upon them. He may choose to punish them in this life or in the grave, or He may leave that punishment and their purifying to be from the fire of hell. And so those people will enter into the fire also, right? And there's numerous hadith in that regard, and it's something which is a well-established principle in our religion. Those people will eventually always leave the fire. Allah Azza wa Jalla will eventually always take them out and bring them into Jannah, because they have the asl of Iman, right? They have the asl of Iman. However, because they don't get total salvation, they still suffer some form of loss, right? And that is what Imam Sa'di and others are trying to say here. So Allah Azza wa Jal gives us 4 steps. Imam Razi in his tafsir, he mentions that the first 2 components, or the first 2 of the 4 attributes, the first 2 are in terms of personal conduct, which is Iman, faith, and Amalus Salih, righteous deeds and action. That's very personal. My Iman, my faith in Allah, my connection to Allah, my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, my good deeds, how much I pray, fast, giving sadaqah and zakah and so on, that's very personal to me. And the second 2 attributes, the latter 2, are to do with helping others. And that is advising one another with truth and advising one another with patience. And so Islam therefore is a religion where we don't just become reclusive. It's not just about me, it's not it's not just me, but it is about others around us, right? And we find that throughout the Quran, where Allah Azza wa Jalla tells us that we have responsibility for others. Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu qu anfusakum wa ahlikum nara. O you who believe, save yourselves and your families from the fire. So it's not just about me, right? Or the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, every single one of you is a shepherd, and every one of you is responsible for his flock. كُلُّكُمْ رَاعٍ وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ. So those are hadith and verses that we have that go to prove what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning. So Allah Azza wa Jal mentions 4 things. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. Except for those who believe and do righteous deeds. They advise one another with truth, and they advise one another with patience. Ubay ibn Ka'ab radiyallahu anhu, the famous companion of the Ansar, the scholar of the Quran, the Qari of the Quran, it is reported that he said, and it is a weak narration, but it's mentioned in the tafsir of Al-Tha'labi, that he said in the tafsir of this verse that إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, except for those who believe, refers to Abu Bakr. And عَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, righteous deeds, refers to Umar. And تَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ, they advise one another with the truth, refers to Uthman. And advising one another with patience, تَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ, refers to Ali radiallahu anhum ajma'in. That's a weak narration from this companion. Those companions, it is incorrect to say, for example, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu is only known for Iman. No, Abu Bakr is known for Iman and is known for righteous deeds and is known for advising with the truth and advising with patience, as is Umar, as is Uthman, as is Ali radiallahu anhu. But sometimes, like, people like to give examples just to bring a concept closer to the understanding of others. But those companions, what was amazing about them is that they had that comprehensive overview of Islam, where they were able not just to excel in one aspect or another, but they brought together the whole package, right? And that's what made them who they were, radiyallahu anhum ajma'in. Muhammad ibn Ka'ab, in his tafsir of this verse, and we mentioned some of this before, he said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he mentioned that mankind is in loss, he gave an exception to that. And he said, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, except those who have Iman. But then Allah Azza wa Jal didn't just leave that, because that's a very generic statement, right? Why? Because everyone will claim to have Iman. Any Muslim will claim to have Iman. It's a very general statement. Includes many people. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala defined it even further. And he said, وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. Not only are they believers, but they're believers who do righteous actions, righteous deeds. And then he says, but then Allah Azza wa Jal didn't just leave it at that either. He could have left it there, and that's the norm in the Quran, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala often combines between those two things, Iman and righteous deeds, and he leaves it there. But he says that he wasn't content to leave it at that either. But then he went a third step further. وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ, and they advised one another with the truth. And then Allah Azza wa Jal didn't leave it there either. He didn't just finish the verse there, but he brought in a fourth concept. And that is, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ, they advised one another with patience as well. Muqatil said, if a person, rahimahullah, Muqatil, famous scholar of tafsir, and like all their biographies, all these people as we mentioned, if you go onto the portal, right, in the study notes or the study material, we have a list of all of their brief biographies. So rather than me going through who they were and what they did, you can just refer to the document. Muqatil, rahimahullah, in his tafsir of this, he said, therefore, those people have Iman, righteous deeds, advise one another with patience, advise one another with the truth. What does it mean? It means that they are not in loss. فَلَيْسُوا فِي خُسْرَانٍ. Those people are not in loss. What is opposite of loss? It is success, right? Salvation. Allah Azza wa Jal has favored those people. Al-Imam al-Tabari rahimahullah ta'ala said, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, except those who believe in Allah and worship Him alone and obey Him and do righteous deeds, and they fulfill their obligations and their duties, and they stay away from the prohibitions that Allah Azza wa Jal has placed upon them. That is the meaning of Iman and Amalus Salih. And righteous deeds, Al-Fudayl ibn Iyad rahimahullah ta'ala, the famous scholar amongst the Salaf, he said that the righteous deeds refers to two aspects. Number one is sincerity, and number two is the correctness of the action. Sincerity, meaning that it's done sincerely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's no showing off, there's no diverting any of that worship to other than Allah Azza wa Jal. That's the first condition in order for it to be a righteous deed, sincerity. And number two is that it has to be correct, meaning that it's in accordance with the teachings of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, with his sunnah. So it's correct in the sense of, in the way that it's legislated, in the way that we follow the guidance of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If those two conditions are met, he said, then it falls under this description in the Quran that is repeated many, many times. Right? It's not just once or twice. It is a very common theme in the Quran that Allah Azza wa Jal, often when He refers to actions, He refers to them as salihat. Right? عَمَلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِنَ الصَّالِحَاتِ. Right? The word and the term of salihat or salih, which means good, righteous, right? Something which is upright. It is something which is repeated often in the Quran. And you will find it often mentioned together with Iman, right? Iman and righteous deeds. It is mentioned together in the Quran some 70 times. 70 times. And as we've repeated many times in our class here, the fact that something is repeated as a concept over and over again in the Quran denotes importance, right? It shows that it is a theme or a concept or a principle or an etiquette or a lesson that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to understand and wants us to apply and wants us to take on board because of how important it is. The fact that Allah Azza wa Jal always brings those two aspects together shows that Iman is not just about the faith of the heart, but it is more than, yes, that is its essence and that is at the basic, at its most basic function. That's what Iman is in the heart. But actually what it should do is manifest itself in terms of action, in terms of sayings, in terms of deeds, in terms of what we do. So Allah Azza wa Jal, in over 70 times, He brings the two of them together. For example, Allah Azza wa Jal says, وَبَشِّرِ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ أَنَّ لَهُمْ جَنَّاتٍ تَجْرِي مِنْ تَحْتِهَا الْأَنْهَارِ. And give glad tidings to those who believe and do righteous deeds, that they will have Jannat, gardens under which rivers flow. In another verse, Allah Azza wa Jal says, وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ أُولَٰئِكَ أَصْحَابُ الْجَنَّةِ هُمْ فِيهَا خَالِدُونَ. And those who have Iman and do righteous deeds, they will be the people of paradise and they will abide therein forever. And in the third verse, Allah Azza wa Jal says, وَعَدَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ لَهُمْ مَغْفِرَةٌ وَأَجْرٌ عَظِيمٌ. Allah Azza wa Jal has promised those who have Iman and do righteous deeds that He will give them forgiveness and He will give them a great reward. And that is the norm in the Quran, right? Those 70 odd occasions that is mentioned in the Quran, the norm is what? Iman and righteous deeds are brought together. And in the ordering, Iman always comes first, right? And then you have righteous deeds. Always amanu wa amilu salihat. Amanu wa amilu salihat. Iman, righteous deeds, right? Iman, obviously, first because it is the foundation, it's the basis, that's what you need first. And then you have amilu salihat, which is the righteous deeds that the Iman brings along. However, it has also occurred in the Quran where the order has been switched, where you have the opposite order, where righteous deeds are mentioned first and then Iman is mentioned second, right? So the order is flipped. So for example, Allah Azza wa Jal says, so the norm is that Iman is always first, right? And then عملوا الصالحات إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات كانت لهم جنات الفردوس نزلا. Those who have Iman, righteous deeds, they will have Jannatul Firdaus as their abode. إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات إنا لا نضيع أجر من أحسن عملا. Indeed, those who have Iman and do righteous deeds, we will never make the reward of those who do good go to loss, right? That's the norm. However, there are 2 or 3 verses in the Quran when the order is flipped. Amil al-Salihat, or righteous deeds, comes first, and then you have Iman. For example, when Allah Azza wa Jalla says in the Quran, وَمَن يَعْمَلْ مِنَ الصَّالِحَاتِ مِن ذَكَرٍ أَوْ أُنثَى وَهُوَ مُؤْمِنٌ فَأُولَٰئِكَ يَدْخُلُونَ الْجَنَّةِ. Whosoever does righteous deeds, whether male or female, and they are mu'min, and they are believers, and they have Iman, then they will have, or they will enter into Jannah. So in this verse, what comes first? Whoever does righteous deeds, male or female. And then as an add-on, or the second condition is mentioned later, whilst they are mu'min, right? Whilst they are believers, then they will enter into Jannah. The question is, why is the order flipped here? And often the reason for that being, when the order is flipped, and that's often a point of reflection, right? And tadabbur. And one of the ways that you make contemplation of the Quran is when Allah Azza wa Jal has a norm in the Quran, a pattern that repeats itself often in the Quran, then on the odd occasion, that pattern isn't followed, right? It's changed. Why is it changed? Why on this occasion has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala switched the order around? So you have a pattern, that's the norm. Allah Azza wa Jal always mentions Iman first, then righteous deeds. But now, hold on this occasion, righteous deeds is mentioned first and then Iman second, right? And often it is to do with context. It's to do with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is emphasizing, or the point that Allah Azza wa Jal is stressing, or the principle that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to bring to our attention. So in this example, the verse before it, Allah Azza wa Jal says, لَيْسَ بِأَمَانِيِّكُمْ وَلَا أَمَانِيِّ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ. It is not according to your wishes, nor the wishes of the people of the book, the people of the scripture. مَنْ يَعْمَلْ سُوءٍ يُجْزَ بِهِ. Whoever does evil will be rewarded accordingly, or will be given its punishment accordingly. وَلَا يَجِدُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ وَلِيًّا وَلَا نَصِيرًا. They will find besides Allah no helper, no protector. The context of the verse is concerning the people of the book, and how they were like, no, we believe, and as long as we believe, we're saved, and it doesn't matter what we do, and there's no problem, and whatever. So Allah Azza wa Jalla is saying, no, actually when you do evil, then you get that punishment, you get the consequences of the evil that you commit. And then when Allah Azza wa Jalla mentions the flip side, He begins with actions also, because that's what they're referring to in the previous verse. مَن يَعْمَلْ سُوءًا, whoever does evil. So Allah begins then by saying وَمَن يَعْمَلْ مِنَ الصَّالِحَاتِ, and whoever does good deeds. And then He mentions the condition of Iman later on. So the norm is Iman always comes first, then righteous deeds. When it is flipped, which is only like 2 or 3 times, a handful of times in the Quran, it is usually because of the context and because of some other lesson that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is drawing our attention to. Also what is mentioned in the context of Iman and Amalus Salih is you find, or Allah, especially alongside Iman anyway, you will often find, and with Amalus Salih, the mention sometimes of the Day of Judgment. So Iman in the Day of Judgment and the last day as well, right? Al-Yawm al-Akhir. So for example, when Allah Azza wa Jalla says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَالَّذِينَ هَادُوا وَالنَّصَارَى وَالصَّابِئِينَ مَنْ آمَنَ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا فَلَهُمْ أَجْرُهُمْ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ وَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. Allah says that indeed those who have Iman, and those from the Jewish faith, and those who were Christians, and the Sabians, the Sabi'in, are those who believed in Allah, and they believed in the last day, and they did righteous deeds. For them they will have their reward with their Lord, and they will have no fear, nor will they despair. Right? So Allah Azza wa Jalla adds the component of Yawm al-Akhir. Right? And often it's done in this context, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala isn't just referring to the believers, but is referring to the believers from other faiths as well. Right? The believers from the Jews, or the nation of Musa alayhi salam, and the believers from the followers of Isa alayhi salam, and so on. When Allah Azza wa Jalla brings all of them together, often in that context, Allah Azza wa Jalla adds the extra component of al-Iman in the last day, right? And that's because, of the differences amongst those faiths and those religions and those beliefs in terms of the ideology concerning resurrection, concerning punishment and reward, concerning accounting on Yawm al-Qiyamah, right? It is another level, and this is replicated in the Sunnah. And often you find when you look at the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and you look at the Quran, the principles or the way that Allah Azza wa Jal mentions something, it is mirrored in the Sunnah in the wording of the Prophet ﷺ. Because one of his most common statements, or one of the fairly common ahadith that you find in the Sunnah, is where the Prophet ﷺ will begin with, "Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawmil akhir." Whoever believes in Allah and the last day. Then let him be hospitable to the guest. Let him, be good to his neighbor. Let him speak good or remain silent. Right? You have all of those add-ons, but the beginning is always what? Belief in Allah and belief in the last day. Right? And some of the scholars in their explanations of those ahadith, they said because from the 6 pillars of Iman, we normally say, right, even in our in the way that it's phrased in the hadith, when you speak about the 6 pillars of Iman, you say belief in Allah and His books, right? His angels, His messengers, His decree, and the last day. And the last day is never called His last day. Right? No wording of any scholar in a hadith do you ever find, and His day of judgment or His last day. It's not ascribed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but the others are. It's His angels and His books and His decree and His messengers and prophets and so on. And so Yawm al-Akhir has always been added, not as being ascribed to Allah Azza wa Jal. And that's why Allah Azza wa Jal picks those 2 often in the Quran when He brings them together in this context. And the Prophet ﷺ used to do the same. He wouldn't say whoever believes in Allah and the messengers, or whoever believes in Allah and the angels, or whoever believes in Allah and His divine books. It's always whoever believes in Allah and the last day, right? And that is because of, and this is something which you find mirrored in the Quran. So Allah Azza wa Jalla says, indeed those who believe, and those from the Jews who believed, and those from the Christians who believed, and those from the Sabi'in, the Sabians. Anyone know who the Sabi'in are? What are the Sabi'in, the Sabians? It's mentioned, sorry?
Those who left their original, what everybody else believed around them.
Yeah, so the Sabi'in is mentioned like a few times in the Quran. Allah Azza wa Jalla refers to them. And there is a difference of opinion amongst the scholars of tafsir as to who exactly this is referring to.
Is
Yeah.
it, sorry.
So the ones that
Yeah.
there's another word that's ascribed to.
Yeah, the Hunafa. Yeah.
So it's a town, a specific people, but also the Sahaba were referred as having sabat. If the Sahaba converted into Islam, they were also called.
Yeah, so the word, okay, so because you have the linguistic sense, you have the historical sense, you have the aqidah sense and so on, and they all kind of like hopefully try to meet somewhere in the middle. All of those are true, right? And you will find all of those different opinions and different statements coming in, which is why there is a difference of opinion, why there is some confusion over who the Sabi'in are referring to. Some of them said it is a belief but in and of itself. It is a religion, a standalone religion that had, like other religions, the Jews and the Christians, they had believers and they had disbelievers, right? They were people who had believers and they had disbelievers. And some of the scholars say that there is still today, and I haven't like verified this independently, but that there is still a group of people, I think in Iraq or Iran or around that region, that refer to themselves as Sabi'in, right? But they're not Muslims. They don't believe in Islam and all. They have their own kind of like religion. Whether they are the remnants or the inheritors or the heirs of the Sabi'in that Allah is referring to, I don't know. Allahu A'lam. But it is something which like I've also come across in this. This is our topic of discussion. Obviously, inshallah, when we come to those verses, we'll go into them in more detail. But some of them did say that. Others said that it's referring to. It is a group from amongst the Jews. It was one of the sects of the Jews that were known as As-Sabi'in. And others said, no, it's referring to, as Rizwan said, that it's referring to those people who remained on the fitrah. They remained upon the original religion, meaning they didn't follow any other religion. They remained upon their natural belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's what they continued to follow. And that's why, as the brother mentioned, that the Muslims, in the Arabic language, those Muslims who accepted Islam, they used to call them as Saba, qad Saba, right? Meaning that they have left. Right? Left what? Left the religion and gone back to nothing, right? And in the time of the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca, you had those people, right? You had those people like Waraqa, like others, who were upon the religion of what they would call Ibrahim alayhi salam. And they were known as Hanifiyin, right? The people upon Ibrahim, his religion alayhi salam, the original religion. So they didn't do the whole idol worship, they didn't do the sacrifice into the idols, they didn't do any of that stuff. But at the same time, they didn't really have a religion in the sense, there's no Sharia, obviously, there's no prophet that came to them. They have just taken the basic concept of the religion of Ibrahim alayhi salam, which is the most important concept, and that is the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. But anyway, either way, Allah Azza wa Jalla refers to those people when it is in the context of those other nations, those other religions, then the aspect of al-yawm al-akhir is added concerning that. And you find the same thing in the Sunnah, how the Prophet ﷺ stresses the importance of righteous deeds with Iman. Right? So you have Iman, you have the righteous deeds. That's a concept that's not only then found in the Quran, in those verses, but it's also mentioned in the Sunnah. For example, in the hadith of Anas ibn Malik, radiallahu anhu, that is in At-Tirmidhi and Ahmad and Al-Hakim, the Prophet said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, إِذَا أَرَادَ اللَّهُ بِعَبْدٍ خَيْرًا إِسْتَعْمَلَهُ. If Allah wants good for a person, He uses them. فَقِيلَ كَيْفَ يَسْتَعْمِلُهُ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. They said, and how is that person used, O Messenger of Allah? He said, يُوَفِّقُهُ لِعَمَلٍ صَالِحٍ قَبْلَ الْمَوْتِ. Allah Azza wa Jal guides them to do righteous deeds before their death. And that is how Allah uses someone. He guides someone to do good and righteousness before death, right? So the concept of doing good deeds and righteous deeds alongside Iman is something which is well established therefore in the Quran and in the Sunnah. So that's the first two elements, right? And those are the ones that are personal. A person needs Iman. They need that belief in Allah Azza wa Jal. And they need to then strengthen their Iman by doing righteous deeds, right? By praying, by fasting, by making umrah, making hajj, by being good to others, by speaking the truth, by all of those different deeds that we find throughout the Quran and throughout the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions two additional attributes, and that is what He concludes the surah with. And He says, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. They advise one another with the truth and they advise one another with patience. Ka'b al-Ahbar, he said al-Haq, the truth, is referring to al-Iman. It is referring to belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or it is Allah and Iman. And as-sabr, or patience, is to be patient upon Allah's obligations. Al-Hasan and Qatada, rahimahumullah, the famous scholars of tafsir, they said al-Haq, the truth, refers to Allah's book, meaning the Quran, and as-sabr, patience, refers to being patient upon Allah's obedience. Shaykh Shanqiti, rahimahullah, or rather in his book Adwa'ul Bayan, Muhammad al-Amin, his student who completed that book for this particular surah, he said, and this is a concept which the Quran agrees with, because often in the Quran, Allah Azza wa Jal calls Islam and refers to the Quran and Islam as the truth. Right? One of the names for Islam and the Quran is the truth. So those scholars who said that when Allah says advise one another with the truth, what does that mean, right? When you say to someone, advise someone with the truth, does it mean just tell them to be honest? Does it mean tell them not to lie? What is it referring to? They say, no, actually what it's referring to is Islam. So you advise one another with Islam, meaning with everything that comes under the Sharia. So for someone, that might be the prayer. For someone else, it might be that they're not giving zakat. For someone else, it might be that they're selling alcohol, or they're dealing in interest. For someone else, it might be they're not respecting their parents. For someone else, it might be reminding them about the rights of their spouses or their children, whatever it may be. Everything is included in the word al-haq. It is a comprehensive term that brings together all of the Sharia. And Shaykh Muhammad al-Amin says, and what they said, those scholars of the past, that al-haq refers to Islam, or refers to the Quran, or refers to everything in the Sharia, he said that's because Allah Azza wa Jal often says concerning the Quran and Islam, He often calls it the truth. So for example, in Surah Al-Isra, Allah Azza wa Jal says, وَبِالْحَقِّ أَنزَلْنَاهُ وَبِالْحَقِّ نَزَلْ. Allah says that the Quran was revealed with the truth, and it comes with the truth. Right? It was revealed in truth, and what it brings is also the truth. Right? And Allah Azza wa Jalla therefore refers to the Quran and everything it brings, which is Islam, in both senses. He refers to it as the truth. And likewise, Allah Azza wa Jalla says, إِنَّا أَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ بِالْحَقِّ فَاعْبُدِ اللَّهَ مُخْلِصًا لَهُ الدِّينَ. Indeed, we have revealed to you the book in truth. So worship Allah, making the religion sincere for Him. So he says, therefore, the Quran, or the truth that Allah is telling us to advise one another with, includes everything. And it just depends on context, just depends on what a person needs most, right? And just one second. And that makes sense, right? It makes sense from a tafsir point of view, it makes sense from a, like an Islamic point of view, that it's not just the truth as in don't lie and only speak truth, but rather it's much more generic, right? It's much more encompassing, much more comprehensive. It includes everything that a person needs. Because some people may well be honest, just by nature, they don't lie. So therefore, what is their truth that you advise them with? It is the truth that they need, right? That they require because of their weaknesses and when shaitan overcomes them. Yeah.
So how would we do Tawassul bil-Haq with non-Muslims? People who are not...
So this is what I was going to come on to, right? So Shaykh Shanqiti rahimahullah goes on and he says, so therefore what it refers to is everything in the religion. So he said, for those people who need Tawheed, what is the haqq for them? It is to call them to Tawheed. Right? So he says, for example, when Allah Azza wa Jalla says, شَرْعَ لَكُم مِّنَ الدِّينِ مَا وَصَّى بِهِ نُوحًا وَالَّذِي أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَيْكَ وَمَا وَصَّيْنَا بِهِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ وَمُوسَى وَعِيسَى نَقِيمُ الدِّينَ وَلَا تَتَفَرَّقُوا فِيهِ. Right? When Allah Azza wa Jalla says that we've given you the same religion that we gave to Ibrahim and Musa and Isa, that is the truth for those people who require that truth. So someone who doesn't know Islam, someone who doesn't understand Tawheed, someone who doesn't know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the truth for them is to call them to that. Whereas for other people, that's not the issue. For other people, it is that they have Islam, but maybe they don't pray. So for them, the aspect of truth is what Allah Azza wa Jalla refers to in the Quran concerning Salah. Right? What the Prophet ﷺ spoke to concerning the Salah. For someone else, no, they believe in Allah and they pray, but they don't give zakah. So now the truth for them is what? It's zakah. And it's not just one thing necessarily, or either or. It could be many things. But the point is that that is what the truth is. And that makes sense also from the point of view from those scholars who said concerning this verse that it refers to these final two attributes referred to al-amr bil-ma'ruf wal-nahy an-munkar, enjoining the good and forbidding the evil. Because enjoining the good is different for each and every single person, and forbidding the harm or evil also differs from person to person. There's not one goodness that that everyone necessarily is in need of. Some people are better and some people are weak. Some people are good in some aspects and some are not, right? And so each one, depending on their own context and what it is that they need, that is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referring to. And Shaykh Shanqiti in his tafsir, rahimahullah, he goes through, like it's a whole list of verses that he brings. He says, so therefore, if someone needs tawheed, these are the verses that you would bring. If it's salah, those are the verses. If it's, for example, adab, right, it's etiquette, the way they're treating their parents, the way they're treating other people who have rights over them, there are verses in the Quran that you bring for them, right? And so therefore, all of that together, though, when you bring it, is what we call al-haq, right? It is what we call the truth. And therefore, to be patient upon that, right? And that's where the sabr comes in, because that is difficult, right? That requires patience, to have that level of not only iman and righteous deeds for yourself, but then to be patient upon advising others, calling them to the truth, being patient when they reject you, when maybe they push back with force, or they ridicule you, or maybe they swear at you, whatever they may do, curse you. Those types of issues also require a level of patience. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings the two of them together. Imam al-Tabari rahimahullah ta'ala in his tafsir, he only mentioned this opinion of Al-Hasan, even though I've given different views of what he only mentioned this opinion of Al-Hasan, meaning that, and normally when he does this, he means that this is the one that he considered to be the strongest, right? The opinion of Al-Hasan rahimahullah is that Al-Haq refers to the Quran, right? The Quran and Islam. And Yahya ibn Salam said the same thing, rahimahullah. He said, Al-Haq is Tawheed. The truth is referring to At-Tawheed. And Imam al-Razi said, and that shows that the haqq is thaqeel, it is heavy, it is a burden. The responsibility is great, because now it's not just one small thing or something here, it is everything that Sharia brings. And he says, and that is why Allah Azza wa Jal then advises us to have patience with it, because of how heavy it is, right? It is difficult. And Allah Azza wa Jal calls the Quran in the Quran is described as being heavy, right? In Surah Muzammil, Allah says, Inna sanulqi alayka qawlan thaqila. Indeed, we are going to place upon you a heavy speech, right? And that's not just physically heavy, because when the Prophet ﷺ would receive revelation, we know that it would be a weight upon his shoulders. He would sweat even on a cold day. It was physically heavy, but also because of the weight that it brings and what it contains and the messages that it brings and the responsibility that it places upon a person. And that's why Al-Qasimi rahimahullah in his tafsir, he said the same thing. He said that Allah Azza wa Jal told us to begin with iman and righteous deeds, because that is the most important thing, right? You have to work on yourself before you work on others. You have to work on your iman and your deeds and your responsibilities and the obligations that Allah has placed upon you before you worry about others so much. But at the same time, as you're doing that, when you see people that need advising, you advise them with the truth, in the truth that they need, as and when they need. And he says, and that is why Allah Azza wa Jal didn't say in this surah, وَأَوْصُوا بِالْحَقِّ وَأَوْصُوا بِالصَّبْرِ, that they are advised to bear with the truth and are advised to be patient. But rather he said, tawasaw. And the ta changes the verb to mean mutual, to mean we mutually do this to one another. So it's not that Allah is advising you with the truth, Allah is advising you with patience. It is, yes, Allah is advising you with that anyway, but watawasaw, but you must advise one another as well. So I must advise you, you must advise me, right? In the truth, and to be patient upon that truth. And that is why, as we mentioned at the beginning of the tafsir of this surah, the companions, it was reported that they wouldn't depart after meeting with one another, except after reciting the surah as a conclusion, or as by way of parting. He said, Shaykh Shanqiti, going back to his tafsir, he said, so if we were to look at all of this, we would understand therefore that when we don't have iman, that takes us to disbelief. And when you don't have righteous deeds, it takes you to having unrighteous deeds or sinning. And when you don't advise one another with the truth, it means either you don't care about each other, or that you advise one another with falsehood. And when you don't advise one another with patience, he said it refers to, or it leads to, people becoming in a sense of agitation. They live with no contentment and no peace, and they have no inner tranquility, because they're constantly dealing with the troubles and the difficulties of life. And then he has like a very long tafsir as how we bring, and we mentioned most of this before anyway, but he mentions how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about loss in different contexts, and this is something which we covered before, and I'm conscious of time, so I don't want to repeat that again. But I will conclude the tafsir of this surah with something which he also mentions, Shaykh Muhammad al-Amin al-Shanqiti rahimahullah, in his tafsir, which is also a very interesting point that he brings, and that is that he says that there is another surah which has a very similar ending, very similar conclusion, in which we're also advised or told to advise mutually one another with two things. But in that surah, and this is in Surah Al-Balad, it is not patience and the truth, but rather it is patience and ثُمَّ كَانَ مِنَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْمَرْحَمَةِ. And then those who have iman and they do righteous deeds, so it's the same thing, وَتَوَاصَوْا, and they mutually advise one another with as-sabr, which is patience, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْمَرْحَمَةِ, and they mutually advise one another with, marhama means mercy, right, from rahmah. So he says that it is therefore interesting how Allah Azza wa Jalla in this surah adds a fifth attribute almost, right? Because we have the four in Surah Al-Asr, in Surah Al-Balad, we have three of the four, but instead of the haqq, Allah Azza wa Jalla replaces it with the fourth component, meaning that you have now in total, you have five. And that is the component of mercy. And that is because these four aspects require mercy in terms of the way that you advise one another, in terms of the way that you advise with the truth, advise with patience, having that mercy upon yourself and upon others is extremely important. That's why Allah Azza wa Jalla told the Prophet ﷺ, فَبِمَا رَحْمَةٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ لِنْتَ لَهُمْ. It is only due to Allah's mercy that you were gentle with them, kind towards them. وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَضًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانْفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ. But if you were to have been harsh and stern with them, they would have dispersed from around you, right? They would have left you, because it is difficult to bear as it is. Very hard to stick to that level of iman and do your righteous deeds and fulfill your obligations and then advise each other and take that advice on board. It is difficult to do. When mercy is taken away from that, it becomes almost unbearable. And so Allah Azza wa Jalla adds that component as a fifth component because it is something which a person needs, and that is that they always require the element of mercy. Mercy upon themselves, mercy in advising one another, and mercy when people err and they make mistakes and they sin and they do wrong, to have mercy upon them in the way that you call them back and in the way that you advise them and bring them back. Because otherwise what you have is a situation where, unfortunately, like sometimes we have in our times, where you're constantly looking to put other people down, right? And you're constantly happy, or some people are happy when others trip up, or they make mistakes, or they sin, or they fail. And we feel this, and that's from shaitan, right? To feel that type of arrogance and pride and happiness that someone else isn't doing so well, or someone isn't so good in their iman, or someone's been exposed for a sin that they've committed and so on. That is from the evil of shaitan. You have that level of mercy, because otherwise that advice is no good. Just as in the hadith of the man who used to drink and used to get lashed, drink and get lashed, drink and get lashed, until on one occasion one of the companions commented and he said, this is a man who never learns. Every time he drinks and he gets punished, he goes back and he does the same sin. The Prophet ﷺ said to him that your brother has more need of you than this. Don't help shaitan overpower him, because he's already down, he's already sinned. By you taking away that element of mercy, and no doubt that is a time when the Prophet used to be harsh and used to be stern, but always within that harshness, within that strictness, there was mercy as well. Because the idea of that harshness is to bring them back to Allah. If the harshness takes them further away from Allah, or makes them continue obstinate upon their sin, then it's not mercy anymore, right? It's not beneficial to be harsh in that way, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. So with that we come to the conclusion of this surah, or the tafsir of this surah rather, and I think we have a few questions online. Are these questions?
Yeah, these are questions.
Okay, so let's scroll down. Which one was the first one?
Just this big. This one.
The essay from Lisa. Okay, so verse number 2 in Surah Al-Asr, you discussed three opinions on the root word of insan, al-dhuhur, nisyan, and naus. For dhuhur, you also mentioned the word isti'nas and uns, I didn't understand the relationship between the three words, dhuhur, isti'nas and uns. I don't know if there's necessarily the connection between the three is that they are the three root words of insan, right? So for dhuhur, the reason why they say that is because insan means to be apparent, right? Al-dhuhur isn't the root word of insan, but it's what the root word of insan means, right? And that is the opposite of jinn, because the root word of jinn is something which is hidden, right? Something which is veiled from your eyes. So they say insan therefore is the opposite, which is something which is apparent, right? So the word dhuhur is not the root word of insan, it is to make us understand what that root word refers to, right? So it's, it's like a synonym for it. Question 2, shortly after mentioning uns and how it means to console one another, you said you make yourself well known apparent because humans require the type of interaction. Was this the whole sentence about uns? And were you explaining how uns meaning is similar to dhuhur and isti'nas? Yeah, so I mean, they all have, so which one of those is exactly the root word? Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best, right? I don't because the scholars of Arabic language will differ. You will find some will say it's nisyan. The one that's nos, which means like movement, like a nos, which kind of comes from haraka and movement, is the one that I found least mentioned amongst the scholars of Arabic language. The two most prominent ones is number one, which is to make apparent, and number two, nisyan, which is to be forgetful, right? That man is by nature forgetful. However, the same root word of insan also comes from isti'nas, right? And isti'nas means to be consoled, or to be, to find some type of consolation. And so because in the Arabic language, when you have multiple words that have the same root word, it means that there is always some link between them, right? Like jinn and jannah and janeen, which is the child in the womb. They all come back to the same root word. What is the common kind of thread between all? They have different meanings, but what is the common thread? There is some aspect of being hidden, right? Jannah is hidden from our eyes, the jinn are hidden, the child in the womb of the mother is hidden. There is always some thread running, right? And I'm not by any means a specialist in the Arabic language or any of that stuff. So what they said, therefore, because isti'nas has the same root word, and it's something which is fairly, like, I think, well known, that humans require some level of social interaction. Even the most reclusive of people still has a family, still have parents, still have people that they would require to know and to get along with. That's like the link between those root words, and Allah knows best. Last lesson you mentioned that khusran means abject total loss. Elsewhere you mentioned, Shaykh Sa'adi said losses of different types, different levels. Some have full and total loss, and some would be in a state of loss, but their loss would be less. How do you marry these two together? So it's obviously depending on the attributes that are lost, right, in the last verse. The more you lose, the greater the sense of loss, or the state of loss. The less you lose from that, then inshallah the greater the sense of salvation from that. And Allah knows best. Sumaira, she asks, given that most cases give reward of Jannah for having iman and righteous deeds only, the latter two mentioned in Surah Al-Asr, how can they be regarded as compulsory? Or that one is sinning if one isn't advising to the haqq and advising the sabr, when the first two are mentioned exclusively as sufficient to gain the rewards. Why not mustahab rather than compulsory? So yes, al-amr bil ma'roof and nahy al-munkar, enjoining the good and forbidding the evil, is not always obligatory. And it has its own etiquettes, and it has its own conditions and so on and wherever. And there is a whole discussion to be had on that very topic, which I didn't bring into this because it's not like an overt mention of those aspects of enjoining the good and forbidding the evil, which are mentioned very clearly and very overtly in other places in the Quran, when Allah speaks clearly about يَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ, right, which is very openly enjoining the good, forbidding the evil, right? And when we come to that, inshallah, we will discuss that in more detail. So it's not necessarily that it is compulsory at all times, but just like righteous deeds, there's a time when your salah is obligatory upon you. Once you fulfilled it, that obligation is different until the next one. Your zakah is once a year. Once it's done, it's until the next one. Al-amr bil ma'roof wa nahy al-munkar is the same thing. It's obligatory in that context at that time if you're able to do it, and so on, with those conditions. Then it's obligatory. If not, then no. Right? It doesn't become obligatory. However, the concept of sabr, and these concepts, just because they're not mentioned together as many times, sabr is mentioned 70 times in the Quran also, like some of the scholars, Imam Ahmad or Al-Hasan al-Basri and others said, that the concept of sabr and patience in the Quran is also mentioned 70 odd times. So just because it's not mentioned together or I didn't mention it doesn't mean that, as a concept, it's not something which is also very often repeated in the Quran. And likewise, the concept of ordering the good and forbidding the evil, even not in those specific terms, but as a concept of when Allah Azza wa Jal enjoins goodness in the Quran over and over again, and He prevents us or forbids us from doing evil, that is mentioned, and it is something which is repeated very often in the Quran. Aisha asks, the use of "and whoever believes in the last day" in various statements, is there a reason why this particular article of faith has been singled out? So the reason that some of the scholars mention is because it is an aspect that isn't directly linked to Allah, right? So you have Allah's angels, they are attributed to Him. Al-Yawm al-Akhir isn't attributed to Him, and so Allah Azza wa Jal mentions both. Others said because it is one of the major aspects of aqeedah that people had difficulty in. So people would believe in Allah, they may believe in the Creator, but they don't necessarily believe in resurrection, right? The whole concept of Jannah, Nar, and punishment, and so on. And so Allah Azza wa Jal refers to that also because of its importance. In regards to calling people to haqq in the workplace, would the display of good manners being righteous sufficient for the conditions of calling to the haqq? Yes, it may be. As the Prophet ﷺ used to do sometimes in the early Meccan days, all he can do is simply invite and simply call and show his good manners. It's not necessarily about anything more. As I said, this is a whole different discussion which inshallah ta'ala there will be a time and place for, inshallah, when we come to that relevant verse. So inshallah, I think we're going to conclude that. Jazakumullah khair for coming. Again, apologies once again for the slight delay in starting. Barakallahu feekum wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.